Hey, welcome back to LSAT Prep with me, your host, Jamie Sherman. Today we're going to be talking about the logical reasoning questions. And I'm going to basically give you how to approach them, some of the main types of questions that you're going to come across, and ways to really help you find the correct answer. Now, when approaching the logical reasoning questions, you have to look at it as evidence and a conclusion. And sometimes there's even a subsidiary conclusion. You have to break it apart. And often, as I had suggested before, it's a good way to bracket off the conclusion, which could be identified by a statement such as, it is good to play at the park, or even by some sort of predecessing word that leads you into the conclusion, such as, therefore, it is good to play at the park, or, and so, it is good to play at the park. And that's usually how you can identify the main conclusion of the logical reasoning question. And you definitely want to do that and start practicing finding the conclusion, because everything that they ask you with the questions will usually have to do with that balance of evidence and conclusion. So if you identify that in your mind, it'll start to help you break down what you need to be looking for. So after you've broken it down, you're going to need to take a look at your answer choices. Now, obviously, it depends on what method you want to use. Some people like to read the question first and then read the passage. Personally, I like to read the passage then go into the question, unless it's a really confusing passage. Like I start into the passage and I'm like, oh wait, this is a little bit confusing. Let me just check to see what they want from me. Because sometimes it can be a little convoluted and you want to take a look and see like, oh, okay, I can work through this and find more of what they want. Because maybe they give so much evidence that you kind of get lost in it. But for the most part, you'll just want to read through, identify the conclusion and the evidence, maybe bracket it off. And even just like the reading comprehension section, take a look at certain special key words, transition words, and adjectives that modify it, such as some, all, none. Circle those. Make sure that you know exactly what the parameters of the logic is, because it is logic, and those words are parameters, and they can try to trip you up in the answers by changing that descriptive word. So you got to watch for the descriptive words, including words that you might not even think really count, such as a description of someone or something. Like they can say, somebody is happy, and one of the answers could be, well, that means that no one is sad. That's their way to manipulate the adjectives of it so that you pick the wrong answer. But you're going to learn how to avoid that by crossing off the wrong answers and taking a look at each conclusion and evidence in the problem to see exactly what they're looking for. Now I'm going to demonstrate very quickly for you a sample of looking for the conclusion and looking for the evidence. And in this question it says, the caterpillar of the monarch butterfly feeds on milkweed plants whose toxins make the adult monarch poisonous to many predators. The viceroy butterfly, whose caterpillars do not feed on milkweed plants, is very similar in appearance to the monarch. Therefore, it can be concluded that the viceroy is so seldom preyed on because of its visual resemblance to the monarch. See right there it says, therefore. That's your indicator that it is a conclusion of the evidence which precedes it. All those things are leading up to the conclusion, and that's where they're drawing their inference from for the conclusion. Now I just quickly mapped this out, so I wanted you to see what I did. I circled the key words, which here I said toxins, adult monarch, poisonous, and that the viceroy does not feed on milkweed plants, but it's very similar to the monarch. I just circled the key stuff as I was reading along, just to pick out the main points that they're looking at. And see, at the end, I bracketed in the conclusion so that I know that, obviously, that part is a conclusion and the rest is the evidence. Then I can move on to my question. Now we're going to go over different types of questions that you'll find common to most of the logical reasoning sections. The first of which is the main point questions. And they'll ask you, what is the main point of the passage you just read? And just like the reading comprehension, it's important to look at the bigger part of the theme, because there can be other subsidiary conclusions, there can be extra evidence, but you really have to look for that point that they're making, that summary point. And if you can't find what you need as support in the passage in the answer choice, it's probably not the correct one. So apply the rules of elimination, just like in other sections in the reading comprehension, where you look for things that don't match or aren't found in the passage with support or don't exactly match the language. Look for those to eliminate. go ahead, read every single one, because it's very important, especially in logical reasoning, that you read every single question, because there can be all right answers and then there can be better answers. So you have to go through each one. It's very important that you pace yourself. But at the same time, mark the ones that are definitely wrong and go through, and then eventually you'll come to ones that, you know, have a little bit of difference, or maybe it'll be really stark. But you have to also look for those adjectives to make sure that, you know, it does match up with the language of the passage. You know, check those, you know, like some, all, or a descriptive characteristic. Check those to see that it does match the language of the passage, and then circle your correct answer. The next type of logical reasoning questions we'll talk about are reasoning questions, ones that actually talk about the thought process behind the passage. And there you're going to see questions that say, this argument proceeds by, or the passage follows by. It's basically saying, what is this passage trying to accomplish? What is this passage's main point, but really what it's trying to do? What is it trying to flow? So you have to look for a lot of key words along it, and you really have to focus on taking a look at the passage as a whole. Other types of questions dealing with reasoning and the argument proceeding includes responses. So in other words, if there's two passages, because sometimes there could be a person and another person talking to each other, and they have a disagreement, you want to see what one person is doing to the other person's argument. So you have to make sure that if it has to do with two people or two concepts, look to see if they ask you what A or B is doing to the other. And the other, the claim that something is doing something in the argument, in other words, a part of the argument, they select out and they say this claim, this selection from the argument is doing something. It has a certain function in the passage. And in those cases, obviously, you're going to have to go and just double check, look at what exactly they're picking out, and see how it plays its role in the passage. And remember, it has to match the reasoning of the author. Make sure that it is accurate. Make sure that it's not deviating into another subject area. Make sure that it's staying on track of the thought process. Another type of logical reasoning question are inference questions. And often the passage will describe something in detail, or maybe even leave it opened up and then ask you, what can you infer from these statements? Or what can you infer from this conclusion? Or, you know, what does this passage suggest? And when you're looking at that, you have to look at the parameters of the passage, almost like a little bit of a logic equation. You have to see what is within its boundaries, what exactly is it talking about, what are the adjectives it's using, and you have to compare that with your answer choices. Because the biggest thing here is you don't want to select an answer choice that is deviating outside of what the passage is supposed to be talking about. And a tricky thing that they'll do is they will put in answers that will make you think of something that's, you know, maybe true in real life, but it's not being discussed about in the passage. It's not being addressed in the passage, or it's a little bit outside the logic of the passage. So just be wary of those. And usually if you map it out as I've shown you, you'll be able to figure out an inference based on what it's saying. And you won't be sidetracked by little things that they throw at you saying, oh, well, this could happen.